I remember the first moment I truly understood what worship meant, not the hollow recitations drilled into us as children, but the instant when belief became the skeleton of my existence, the unseen structure that held everything together. I must have been 7, perhaps 8. The official records of my birth were destroyed in one of the countless administrative fires that consume whole data halls across the Imperium, bureaucratic tragedies that no one even notices. We stood in endless rows that stretched the length of the great cathedral's nave, our bare feet pressed against marble worn smooth by generations of penitence. The air tasted of incense and sweat, thick with recycled breath, and the temperature hovered in that unsettling space between warmth and chill, forcing constant awareness of the body, flesh that could ache, flesh that could sin. High above us the gargoyles leered, their open mouths fitted with vox grills that carried the preacher's voice, harsh and holy. I could not see him through the sea of small shaven heads, but his words reached me all the same, every syllable etched into memory with the weight of 10,000 years of creed. He spoke of the divine sovereign's sacrifice, the eternal torment upon his radiant throne, the unpayable debt humanity owed, a debt to be serviced forever through obedience and suffering. A child near me began to cry. An enforcer in black ceramite moved down the line, the sound of his boots like distant thunder, and that child was simply gone. None of us spoke. We learned silence faster than prayer. The walls around us were covered in scenes of conquest and martyrdom, rendered in flaking gold leaf and faded pigment. I remember staring at them until my eyes watered, searching for beauty in the pain. The saints burned in ecstasy, their expressions twisted into something indistinguishable from agony. Angels with metal wings lifted severed heads like trophies of devotion, and at the center of it all sat the sovereign himself, crowned in light, bound by the architecture of a throne that was more tomb than seat, more machine than flesh. His face was never shown, only the radiant absence where divinity hid behind symbols. They taught us the canticles of service before we learned to read. Each word was pressed into our minds through repetition, hunger, and punishment. My soul is his coin, my flesh his instrument. My thoughts are his, my words his, my deeds his shadow. We repeated it until the rhythm sank beneath thought, a constant hum inside the machinery of our brains. Even now, decades later, the litany whispers through me unbidden, like an echo carved into bone. Childhood in the Imperium is brief, a season that ends before you realize it has begun. By 10, aptitude tests determined our destinies. Servo skulls hovered over us, scanning our thoughts, recording our answers, divining our futures with mechanical precision. I showed a gift for memorization, for ritual precision, for the kind of devotion that looks impressive on parchment. My fate arrived in the form of a data slate carried by a cherub, a grotesque hybrid of infant corpse and servo mechanism, its waxy flesh fluttering with the buzz of artificial wings. The message congratulated me in the language of bureaucracy. I had been selected for theological instruction within the schola progenium. It should have been an honor. It felt like a sentence. The theological scholar occupied an entire spire, its walls lined with skulls of those who failed. Each one a warning, a decoration of devotion. The smell of sanctified decay permeated everything, a mix of incense and mortality. Our instructors were men and women whose bodies had long ago twisted beneath the weight of prayer, their eyes burning with the fervor of those who had given their humanity to faith. They told us that belief was not emotion but discipline, that holiness was measured not in tears but in obedience. Devotion was a science of posture, a geometry of submission. We memorized thousands of hymns, learned the exact pitch for every phrase, the proper arc of the spine during prostration, the sacred mathematics of worship. Deviation was heresy, precision was salvation. I excelled not out of love but instinct. I had learned early that survival meant becoming exactly what they wanted. I shaped myself into their image, learned when to let my voice break, when to weep during meditations on the sovereign's suffering. They called me blessed, chosen, favored by light. I knew I was hollow. Their praise washed through me like static. Whatever spark of individuality had once existed was scraped clean, leaving a vessel shaped for doctrine. The years passed in ritual monotony, each day identical, each prayer indistinguishable from the last. On feast days, we celebrated by punishing ourselves, flagellating our backs until the stones shone with blood. My body changed, but my sense of self did not. My spine curved from study, my knees scarred from kneeling, my hands calloused from holding relics until my fingers bled. We were forbidden mirrors. Reflection was vanity, vanity was sin. I knew my face only through others' expressions, or pity, reverence. They saw sanctity. I saw absence. When I turned 16, I was ordained as a subdeacon and sent to a cathedral built within the bones of an ancient hive. Its foundations disappeared into shadow. Its spires pierced the smog above. My duties were endless yet meaningless. Lead morning hymns, hear confessions, assign penances, maintain devotion. I had imagined that serving the faithful would feel holy. Instead, it was mechanical. Rituals performed like levers pulled on an ancient machine. The worshippers came in an endless procession, their eyes glazed from exhaustion. Their sins were always the same: doubt, envy, distraction, the fleeting desire for rest. I handed out punishments like prescriptions, hours of kneeling, days of fasting, lashes for impure thought. They thanked me, tears streaking soot-stained faces. They called their suffering purification. I called it procedure. The cathedral never slept. Even in the false night when the hive dimmed its lights to conserve power, voices filled the air in unbroken prayer. The faithful rotated in shifts as if devotion itself were a factory process. I would stand in the pulpit, the weight of unseen thousands pressing down from the shadows, the air vibrating with their murmurs. The architects had designed the acoustics to create the illusion of divine presence, the sound bouncing endlessly through the vaulted stone, overlapping into something that felt alive. In truth, it was only desperation amplified, a sound like millions begging the void to care. I began to despise them, though I never admitted it aloud. Their faith made me feel fraudulent. They suffered beautifully, and I could offer only hollow words. Once a woman came to me with hands twisted by labor, her face a patchwork of scars from industrial accidents. She confessed that she had thought of her daughter, taken by tithe years ago, and wondered whether the child lived in comfort or fear. That fleeting moment of distraction had filled her with terror. She believed she had sinned by wanting to know. I prescribed her 50 lashes and a week of fasting. That was the doctrine. She thanked me. She kissed my hand. She left smiling, convinced she had been saved. I watched her go, and in her gratitude I saw the cruelty of the system laid bare. We had built a machine that converted suffering into virtue, despair into obedience, and I was one of its operators. The higher one climbs in the ecclesiastical hierarchy, the clearer it becomes that faith is another form of control. At council meetings, the senior priest spoke of the faithful as resources to be managed. They discussed sermons in terms of effectiveness ratios. How much fear versus hope produced the most stable congregations. They debated the frequency of feast days as though adjusting production schedules. Religion was a science of population maintenance, and we were its engineers. And yet, despite understanding the machinery, I could not stop believing. That was the true horror. The indoctrination went deeper than thought. It lived in the nerves, in the chemical patterns of the brain. To doubt was to suffer physically, as though some internal organ clenched in revolt. Even heretical thoughts induced nausea, tremors, tears. Faith had become not belief, but programming. When I reached 20, I was promoted to full deacon and transferred to a shrine world at the edge of imperial space, a planet that existed solely to manufacture devotion. Every street was a prayer, every building a reliquary. The skies glowed with pollutants that turned the clouds gold and purple, beautiful and deadly. The air tasted of incense and chemicals. The rain that fell could strip paint from stone. My job was bureaucratic holiness, scheduling prayer shifts, distributing offerings, ensuring relics reached their destinations. I worked in a scriptorium filled with scratching pens and coughing clerics, recording every candle lit, every tear shed, every life offered. Faith had become an accounting system, measured in devotion hours and blood liters. The pilgrims arrived in endless waves, old and dying, hoping that death near a holy relic might buy them grace. They crawled on knees already raw, pressed lips to glass that held bones and dust. Whether the relics were real did not matter. Belief itself was the commodity. And when the pilgrims died, as many did, their remains were taken below to the silent servitors, who rendered them down into mortar, their bones becoming part of the next cathedral wall. The process was unspoken, yet universally accepted. To be built into the structure of faith was considered the highest possible honor. I should have felt blessed. My life was stable, my body well-fed, my quarters clean. But the Imperium does not permit peace. Contentment is sedition. The priesthood was a nest of rivalry and suffering. Each cleric competed to display the most devotion, to outsuffer the others in visible ways. One colleague wore a chain of barbs around his torso, tightening it weakly until infection consumed him. Another cut out her own tongue, believing silence to be purity. Both died in service, their remains sanctified, their names recorded as examples. I watched and learned moderation, the art of appearing fervent without dying from it. Devotion was theater, and I became its star performer. My tears were rehearsed. My tremors were calculated. Sincerity was irrelevant. Survival required spectacle. The Inquisition was ever present. Their agents drifted through the crowds like ghosts, their black armor gleaming, their eyes unreadable. They claimed to hunt heresy, but their true purpose was to sustain fear, to ensure no one trusted anyone. Accusations were currency. A careless remark could end a life. I spoke little and listened less, but even silence could betray suspicion. When my denunciation came, it was for lack of fervor, a vague charge that could mean anything. They dragged me from my pulpit mid-sermon. No one protested. The crowd pretended not to see. The cell was cold and narrow, its walls sweating condensation. My interrogator was an ancient woman of metal and scar. Her voice was a whisper of rusted servos. She did not torture me with tools. She used chemicals that erased the boundary between thought and speech. Under their influence, I poured out everything. My doubts, my emptiness, the truth that I believed nothing yet could not stop worshipping. When I finished, I waited for death. Instead, she regarded me with something that might have been pity. "You are not a heretic," she said. "You are merely broken. The sovereign does not require love, only obedience. Continue." Then she left, and I lay on the floor until the guards came to return me to my duties. No record of the interrogation existed. It was as though it had never happened, except for the tremor in my hands and the hollow in my chest where certainty had once been. After that, faith became reflex again, but without illusion. I moved through rituals mechanically, like a servitor performing tasks beyond understanding. My prayers were words without meaning. My devotion was motion without intent. I functioned, but I did not live. The years blurred, new shrines, new faces, the same cycle of suffering sanctified. My body aged into rigidity, my spine bent, my voice rasping with decades of smoke and chant. I had become what they wanted, an efficient instrument of worship, incapable of rebellion, incapable of hope. There were moments, rare and terrifying, when clarity pierced through the fog. They came during feast days when the air grew heavy with hallucinogenic incense, or when sacramental wine numbed the barriers of thought. In those moments I saw the Imperium as it truly was, a machine of human parts powered by pain, driven by fear, worshipping itself. We were not serving the sovereign. We were feeding the mechanism of his worship. The system devoured belief to sustain its own existence. The divine throne was not salvation. It was the mirror of our collective enslavement, a god machine whose suffering reflected our own. The revelation would vanish as quickly as it came, leaving me shaken, gasping, and eager to forget. Clarity was unbearable, and yet I endured, because endurance was the only thing left to me. In the Imperium, survival is the closest thing to rebellion. Every breath taken in awareness of futility is an act of defiance. But even defiance becomes devotion when the system is designed to absorb it. That is the paradox of faith here. Resistance feeds the same engine as obedience. There is no outside, no freedom, only different methods of compliance. We serve even when we despair, especially when we despair. Years folded into each other like the pages of a hymn book left open too long, its edges fused by wax and ash. When I was elevated to the rank of district prelate, I discovered that holiness was mostly paperwork. The cathedral archives where I worked were vast enough to lose armies in, corridors humming with the ghostly static of ancient cogitators. Each morning I reviewed requests from lesser priests, appeals for incense allocations, repairs to reliquary cases, permissions to host processions whose participants would die of exhaustion before finishing their route. Every document bore the same blessing at its header, in the radiant name of him who suffers eternally. By the end of each day, that phrase had lost all meaning, a sequence of syllables that passed through my mind like filtered air. I approved, stamped and filed, my signature another cog turning in the mechanism of worship. The clerics under me looked to me as a shepherd, yet I guided no one, merely ensured that the endless river of devotion did not stagnate. Sometimes I walked the lower districts where the air was thick with the stink of manufactoria fumes and burnt oil. There the faithful gathered in open shrines built from scavenged metal, their makeshift icons glistening with soot. They prayed for food, for strength, for mercy none of them would receive. I would stand among them, listening to their chants, my own lips moving automatically. Their desperation was contagious, their faith raw and painful, a hunger that gnawed at the bones. I envied them their simplicity. They still believed that the divine sovereign watched, that he cared, that somewhere beneath the rot of the Imperium there was a heart that beat for them. When I returned to the upper spires, to the polished marble floors and perfumed air, that envy curdled into shame. My colleagues spoke of doctrine as merchants speak of profit margins. We measured piety by attendance rates, assessed the effectiveness of sermons by the weight of the tithe boxes afterward. The phrase souls converted appeared beside production figures in quarterly reports. I signed off on all of it, my quill scratching across parchment that might as well have been human skin. The work consumed the hours so completely that time ceased to feel linear. Days became loops, ceremonies repeating until even the sequence of prayers lost distinction. The city around us decayed, but the church endured as it always had, feeding on decay like a sacred fungus. The dreams began soon after. At first they were fragments, glimpses of a golden light too bright to bear, voices layered atop each other like the echo of endless choirs. Then the images sharpened. I saw the sovereign not as he appeared in murals, but as a desiccated giant, veins turned to wires, eyes hollowed into black suns. 1,000 psykers screamed as their essence was drawn into him, sustaining an agony older than empires. I would wake choking on incense that was not there, my mouth tasting of copper. During daylight, I convinced myself they were nightmares born of fatigue, but at night the visions returned, stronger each time, until I began to wonder if I was seeing truth, if the Emperor's light was not illumination but consumption. I told no one. Confession was dangerous. Doubt could be interpreted as infection, and infection demanded purification. Instead, I buried myself in ritual, performing each motion with mathematical precision until even fear became routine. When clarity threatened, I drowned it in duty. I organized parades for relics whose authenticity no one questioned. I signed the cremation orders of pilgrims who had died mid-prayer, ensuring their ashes were mixed into consecrated mortar. I wrote hymns about obedience that other priests quoted in their sermons. My words spread across worlds, but I felt nothing. The voice that once trembled in devotion had become another bureaucratic instrument, transmitting static in the name of holiness. Famine came to the hive without warning. Supply routes failed, the administratum blamed warp storms, and the granaries emptied. People died kneeling. The smell of death seeped into the cathedrals, masked only by stronger incense. The faithful begged for intervention, for miracles. I had none to give. We redistributed what little we had as offerings, reasoning that hunger was a form of purification. The logic was monstrous, but it was doctrine. When the starving turned violent, Arbite squads fired into the crowds, and the surviving pilgrims thanked them for restoring order. I watched from a balcony as bodies were hauled away, my fingers tightening on the railing until the skin split. Their screams echoed through the chamber like a twisted hymn, and for a moment I thought I saw the divine throne reflected in their suffering, feeding on it, expanding. Sleep abandoned me. My thoughts became static, fragments of prayer tangled with images of fire. During sermons, I sometimes lost my place mid-sentence, words spilling out of order, phrases collapsing into nonsense. The younger priests whispered that I had been touched by revelation. In truth, I was fracturing. I began to hear the litany even when no one spoke it, the rhythm pounding behind my eyes like machinery. I am nothing, he is all. The mantra pulsed with every heartbeat until my body itself became an extension of that belief. There was no distinction between worship and existence. I functioned, therefore I praised. The collapse of the hive was inevitable. When the manufactories failed and power grids flickered out, the upper spires sealed themselves off. In the darkness below, riots spread like infection. The church ordered mass penance rituals to restore unity. Thousands gathered in the plaza before the Grand Basilica, chanting for salvation that would not come. I was ordered to lead them. Standing on the dais, I looked out at the sea of faces lit by the red glow of burning refineries. For the first time in decades, I spoke without script or approval. I told them the truth as I saw it, that we were worshipping a corpse, that our prayers fed a machine that could never love us. My voice echoed across the square, swallowed by the wind. No one moved. They thought it was another metaphor, another parable of devotion through despair. And perhaps it was. By dawn, the Arbites had arrested me. My confession was recorded, my rank stripped, my name erased from all archives. The sentence was servitude in a penal legion, redemption through death. The transport that carried us stank of oil and fear. Around me sat thieves, heretics, bureaucrats who had failed their quotas. We were all equal now, numbered instead of named, destined for the same oblivion. When the hatch opened onto the war-scarred world where we would die, the air burned my lungs. They handed us laser guns with failing charge packs and armor stitched from recycled flak plates. The officer's blessing was a single phrase: die well and he may forgive you. The first charge was chaos. The ground erupted under artillery. The sky tore open with streaks of light, and men screamed prayers no one heard. I ran because running was all there was. Around me, bodies fell like offerings. I tripped over the dead, rose again, fired into shapes I could barely see. When silence finally came, I realized I was alive. Survival felt obscene. The next assault took half the regiment. The third left only a handful. Each day bled into the next, until battle became the only liturgy I knew. Eat when ordered, kill when commanded, sleep in the mud if permitted. The Emperor was not in the sky, nor in the relics. He was in the command to obey, in the certainty that disobedience meant erasure. Some nights I caught myself whispering the catechism before sleep, the words forming automatically between cracked lips. I did not believe them, yet they came all the same, as instinctive as breath. Perhaps belief no longer mattered. The Imperium did not need believers, only functioning parts. I had become one again, stripped of title, of purpose, of individuality. In the Legion there were no priests or sinners, only expendables. Death was the only absolution left, and it refused to come. Then came the day the trench collapsed. The trench gave way with a groan like the voice of the planet itself, a deep metallic shriek as tons of soil and shattered armor plates collapsed. I had been crouched beneath a broken gun shield when the world fell in. The air vanished in a heartbeat, replaced by choking dust and weight that pressed the breath from my lungs. Somehow the debris settled in such a way that a narrow pocket remained around me, an accidental coffin just large enough to breathe. I could not move. Every attempt sent knives of pain through my ribs. Above me, distant thunder rolled, the muffled continuation of the war that had already forgotten I existed. I shouted once, twice, but the dirt swallowed the sound. The realization that no rescue would come arrived quietly, almost politely. The Legion did not retrieve the buried. We were cheaper to replace than to recover. At first, panic consumed me, a blind animal terror that clawed at the walls of my prison. I hammered at the earth until my fingers bled, screamed until my throat tore. Then exhaustion took hold, followed by a strange calm. With nothing left to struggle against, thought returned like an old disease. Memories surfaced unbidden. The marble floors of the scholar, the scent of sanctified oil, the trembling of a child reciting his first prayer. I saw again the faces of the faithful I had condemned to penance, the woman with the ruined hands who had thanked me for her lashes. One by one they appeared in the darkness, crowding the narrow space until I could almost feel their breath. Their silence accused me more than any inquisitor ever could. Time lost meaning. Hunger dulled into a distant ache, thirst into a slow burning. My mind began to drift, slipping between memory and hallucination. I heard the litany whispering from the soil, not in my voice but in thousands of overlapping tones. My soul is his coin, my flesh his tool. The words pulsed with the rhythm of my fading heartbeat. I tried to silence them, but they grew louder, reshaping themselves into confession. I understood then that I had spent my life as a cog in the grand machinery of faith, translating human pain into the language of obedience. Every sermon, every ritual, every punishment had fed the same engine that now entombed me. I was not an exception. I was its product. The revelation brought no relief, only a numb acceptance. When the air grew thin, delirium replaced thought. Light bloomed behind my eyelids, a vision or perhaps the final misfiring of dying neurons. I saw the sovereign's throne stretching across the stars, not golden but rusted, dripping with the residue of countless souls. The figure upon it was vast beyond measure, a fusion of bone and wire, flesh turned to circuitry. He opened his eyes and I realized they were mirrors, reflecting every worshipper who had ever lived. In them I saw myself, small and voiceless, praying to my own reflection. The meaning was simple and terrible. We had never worshipped him at all. We had worshipped the echo of our servitude. I must have lost consciousness, for when sound returned it came as scraping and shouts above me. Light stabbed through a crack, blinding and unreal. Rough hands dragged me upward, and suddenly I was in the open again, coughing mud, the sky a bruised smear of smoke. A field medic examined me with the detachment of one checking a machine for function. My injuries were catalogued, treated, and dismissed. Within hours I was returned to the line, weapon in hand, as though nothing had happened. I had been denied even the dignity of dying properly. The Imperium had use for me still. From that day I ceased to think of myself as human. The flesh obeyed commands, fired when ordered, ate when permitted. The mind floated somewhere else, detached, observing. I watched comrades die with the same disinterest I once reserved for the recitation of prayers. The war was endless, its purpose forgotten, yet each death, each scream, each collapse of flesh into mud felt like a continuation of the same sermon I had preached for decades. Worship through annihilation, devotion through obedience, service through silence. In that endless repetition, I found a grotesque peace. If I was nothing, then pain itself could no longer touch me. At night, under a sky the color of iron, I sometimes imagined I could hear the universe breathing. Perhaps it was the wind through the trenches, or perhaps it was the echo of that vast divine machine turning somewhere beyond comprehension. I realized that the Imperium would never end, not because it was strong, but because it had perfected inertia. Every cog believed it essential, every prayer another gear tooth locking the whole in place. The machine would grind forward forever, devouring generation after generation until entropy itself grew tired. And I, one microscopic fragment of its mechanism, would keep moving as long as function remained. That I finally understood was what it meant to serve the Emperor. The days after my return from burial blurred into one unending stretch of obedience. Each dawn, if such a word even applied to this world of constant ash, began with the same command shouted through vox speakers, the same ritual of reassembly and march. The penal legion moved as one mass of numbered shadows, our identities scrubbed away by mud and exhaustion. Our overseers did not speak our names. They barked designations like coordinates. Somewhere in the distance, the war continued to grind forward with no victory in sight, only the endless exchange of bodies for territory. It occurred to me then that this was the purest expression of faith the Imperium could produce. Worship reduced to logistics, sacrifice measured by the ton. I found a strange rhythm in the repetition, a comfort in the predictability of death. The men around me prayed when the shells fell, their mouths shaping the same old litanies through cracked lips, begging the divine sovereign for deliverance. I did not join them. My prayers had long ago become instinct, running silently beneath the surface of thought, a whisper embedded in muscle memory. Sometimes I could almost hear it in the rhythm of the artillery, the steady cadence of serve, obey, endure. The battlefield itself was a cathedral. Its pillars, columns of smoke, its hymns, the screams of the dying. Every detonation was an amen. Every corpse a relic. We were performing a mass written by a god who had forgotten the words. When the fighting lulled, the commanders ordered us to rebuild fortifications. We dug trenches through the ruins of what had once been a city, unearthing fragments of civilization, broken icons, rusted data slates, skeletal remains still clinging to rosaries. The soldiers joked about the relics we found, pretending not to recognize the faces frozen in devotion. I buried them where they lay, whispering the prayers of absolution automatically, though I knew they were meaningless. What comfort could absolution bring to bones already ground into dust? The act itself was ritual for my own sake, a mechanical motion that kept me tethered to something resembling purpose. Rumors spread among the ranks that reinforcements were coming, that this endless campaign might finally end. No one believed it, but we repeated the lie because even false hope served a function. Hope was fuel. Hope made men charge when logic demanded retreat. The officers encouraged it, weaving new myths of imminent salvation, of victory sanctioned by the Emperor's will. I recognized the tactic. I had used it myself from pulpits long destroyed. Watching them, I understood how little difference there was between preacher and commander. Both demanded faith, both consumed the faithful, both promised redemption they could never deliver. The only difference was the vocabulary. One used scripture, the other strategy. The dreams returned, sharper now, no longer fragmented glimpses but coherent visions that lingered after waking. I saw again the great throne, its cables pulsing like veins, the endless tide of souls flowing into its heart. The Emperor, no, the sovereign machine, stared at me from the void, and for the first time I thought I heard him speak. His voice was not thunder or command, but the grinding of gears, the hum of systems running far beyond repair. "You will continue," he said, "not as a blessing but as an order written into the code of my existence." I awoke gasping, my hands trembling, the taste of electricity on my tongue. The others assumed it was trauma. They were not wrong. Weeks passed, or months. Time had no real meaning in a place where the sun was obscured by permanent smoke. The Legion's numbers dwindled until our platoon resembled a procession of ghosts. We fought not for conquest, but to fill the silence between orders. Each new assault was indistinguishable from the last, a cycle of advance, slaughter, retreat, repair. I stopped keeping count of the dead. Instead, I began to measure the war in heartbeats, each one another proof of the machine's persistence. The thought brought no despair, only inevitability. The Imperium did not need to win. It merely needed to survive, and survival was its only victory. Then came the battle that should have been my end. We were ordered to storm a ridge fortified with alien weapons that tore through armor like paper. The sky burned violet, the air stank of ozone, and the ground trembled beneath the bombardment. We ran because running was all there was left to do. I remember seeing the officer's back disintegrate in a flash of light, the man beside me vaporized into steam. I fell, rolled, and found myself in a crater filled with water black as oil. For a moment, everything went silent. The war, the prayers, even the whisper in my head. I looked into the reflection trembling on the water's surface and saw not my face but the Emperor's. Not the radiant god of murals, but the decaying one from my dreams. Eyes empty, mouth sewn shut with golden wire. I laughed then, a sound torn from somewhere between horror and understanding. The silence broke with another barrage, and instinct took over. I climbed from the crater, weapon raised, firing blindly into the haze. The alien line faltered, or perhaps we simply overwhelmed it with bodies. By nightfall, the ridge was ours. The victory meant nothing. The next day, we would be ordered to charge again, to retake what we had already taken. Still, command praised our devotion. The chaplain recited the benediction of endurance, his voice trembling with sincerity, and for a heartbeat I almost pitied him. He still believed his words held power. I envied that ignorance. Belief, I realized, was not a blessing but an armor against the truth. And truth once seen could never be unseen. The war did not end. It never does. Simply shifted direction, moved to another continent, another nameless enemy. The orders came through the Vox without emotion, instructing us to march east toward a front that had already consumed several legions before us. We obeyed, of course. Obedience was the only skill we had left. The journey took weeks across plains littered with the bones of earlier crusades. Along the way, we passed wrecked vehicles fused into the earth like monuments to futility, each one marked with the double-headed sigil of faith. The symbol had once stirred reverence in me. Now it felt like a warning, a reminder that nothing truly dies in the Imperium. It merely changes function. Even in ruin, these machines continued to serve, their carcasses forming bridges and shelters for those who would follow. That was our destiny as well, to rot usefully. The new battlefield was worse than the last, if such a measure existed. The air shimmered with radiation, the sky split by unending lightning storms that never reached the ground. The enemy was faceless, mechanical, tireless, and our commanders ordered us forward into the slaughter, with the same liturgical precision as a priest intoning mass. The noise was beyond sound, a constant scream that filled the skull until thought ceased. I moved through it as though in a trance, firing, reloading, ducking, repeating, my body operating on memory long after meaning had fled. Around me men fell and rose and fell again, their names forgotten before their blood cooled. Somewhere in that chaos I realized that I was no longer afraid, not of death, not of pain, not even of the Emperor's judgment. Fear requires hope, and hope had been burned out of me years ago. During one rare lull in the fighting, I sat beside the remnants of a burned-out tank, staring at the clouds of ash drifting through the trenches. One of the younger conscripts, a boy too small for his armor, asked me if I still believed. I could not answer immediately. Belief was a word I no longer recognized. At last I told him that belief was irrelevant. The Imperium did not require faith, only endurance. He looked at me with eyes wide as planets, and for a moment I saw myself as a child, standing in the cold cathedral air, reciting prayers I did not understand. The boy nodded slowly, as if the answer comforted him, and returned to his post. He died that evening when a shell landed close enough to erase him entirely, and I felt nothing but a dull acknowledgement that one more gear had ground to dust. Night fell with the taste of iron in the wind. The stars were hidden by smoke, and for the first time I wondered if the Emperor could see anything from his golden cage. I imagined his thoughts, or what remained of them, drifting somewhere between agony and apathy, bound by the machine that fed upon him as it fed upon us. In that reflection, I saw the true nature of our faith. We were not worshippers but fuel, our devotion the power that kept the dying God alive, each prayer another spark, each sacrifice another breath to prolong his torment. It was not cruelty that drove the Imperium, but inertia, the refusal to end. And in that endless refusal, we called our suffering holy. The campaign stretched on until even the officers stopped pretending victory was possible. Supplies ran thin, morale thinner. The air stank of decay and chemical fire. When the order finally came to withdraw, we had nothing left to retreat to. No ships, no command structure, no home. The Vox channels filled with static, the banners burned, and the last chaplain was torn apart by those he had once led in prayer. Yet even then, amid the collapse, men still whispered the Emperor's name. They did it without conviction, the syllables reduced to reflex, but the sound persisted unkillable. It struck me that this was the Imperium's true immortality, not strength or unity, but the inability to stop repeating itself. Faith had become its own echo, carried forward by mouths that no longer understood the words. When I finally collapsed, it was not from injury, but exhaustion so complete that it felt like grace. I lay in the mud, the world around me dissolving into noise. My weapon slipped from my hands, my breath slowing. I thought of the cathedrals, the sermons, the faces of those I had guided into obedience. I wondered if they had ever seen what I now saw. That worship was not devotion but surrender, not love but erasure. The truth was simple and inescapable. We were all parts of the same vast mechanism, and the mechanism required only that we keep moving until it broke. I felt no bitterness, no relief, only the quiet understanding that perhaps this was what the Emperor himself endured. An eternity of service without meaning, a divinity trapped in machinery built to outlast all reason. The last thing I remember before darkness claimed me was the rhythm of distant artillery, steady as a heartbeat. It reminded me of the litanies I had once taught, of the cadence of prayers that promised eternity. Perhaps there was comfort in that symmetry, the machine and the man ending together, indistinguishable at last. Whether I lived or died afterward no longer mattered. The Imperium would endure. It always endures. And in its endurance, it ensures that no soul ever truly escapes its orbit. That is the final lesson of devotion. To serve even in death, to worship even in silence, to become one more whisper in the endless chorus of obedience.